Director of the Swami Vivekananda Cultural Center at the Consulate General of India in Durban, Dr. Chaitanya Prakash Yogi, Mr. Satrindranath Raghunandan Mac Maharaj ji, Advocate Robin Sewlal, Mr. CPM Chunu, Mr. Piyush Khandelwal, distinguished guests, online viewers, Namaskar and welcome to a very, very special day indeed, where we celebrate the birth anniversary of Dr. Nelson Mandela, with the theme being Life and Times of Nelson Mandela. Indeed, today in our midst, we have a very special speaker with us, and that is Mr. Mac Maharaj, who will be interacting with Advocate Robin Sewlal. Just a brief background about Mr. Maharaj. Mr. Maharaj says Nelson Mandela is a forward in the biography Shades of Difference. Mac Maharaj ji and the Struggle for South Africa by the Paradig O'Malley wrote that Mac G is someone special. Mac willingly put his life online, not many occasions, but as each occasion demanded. He was one of South Africa's founding fathers. Mac Maharaj became active in the struggle for democracy and freedom in the year 1953. He was among the founders of the anti-apartheid movement in UK. He underwent training in printing and sabotage in German Democratic Republic in 1961 to 1962 and returned to South Africa in May in 1962 to serve in the underground. He served 12 years imprisoned on Robben Island, smuggled out of the prison, the draft of the Long Walk to Freedom by Nelson Mandela, and in exile was appointed the secretary of the department charged with establishing and maintaining political underground of the ANC, as well as the mass mobilization of people within South Africa. In 1988, he was cadently entered South Africa as overall commander of the political military of Vula operation. He was one of the joint secretaries of the multi-party negotiations that produced the interim constitution, which was ushered in the first democratic elections of South Africa in 1994. President Nelson Mandela appointed him the transport minister in his government. In 1997, he was selected as one of the 8 government ministers around the world who have been the most innovative and forward-thinking in their approach to privatization and infrastructure development by New York Journal Infrastructure Finance. Indeed, today Mr. Mac Maharaj will be interacting with Advocate Robin Sewlal, who is the Associate Director of Journalism at the Durban University of Technology. He is an activist for radiocracy, comprising radio, democracy, and development. Advocate Robin Sewlal is a judge of a Vodacom Journalist of the Year competition and has served as commissioner at the Broadcasting Complaints Commission of South Africa, as well as is the chairperson of the board at the King Dinuzulu Hospital. Namaskar and welcome today for the interaction, Mr. Mac Maharaj and Advocate Robin Sewlal.
Namaskar, Shristi. Thank you very much for that introduction. Mr. Maharaj, good evening to you.
Welcome. Good evening. Good evening to you and all the people who are viewing this program.
Such a pleasure speaking with you about a gentleman on such an auspicious day. Just listening to what Shristi was saying and introducing you, I think I'll be right in saying that you don't only, or rather you haven't only been around the block, you possibly you own the block. Am I right?
Oh, no, I don't. I think that's taking it a bit too far. I have been around the block a few times, but I'm getting a bit tired nowadays.
Yeah, I'm especially referring to your relationship with the great Nelson Mandela. Mr. Maharaj, briefly, what are your memories of Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela as both a person as well as a leader?
Really, it is It has been one of the privileges of my life to have gone to prison and spent 12 years in close proximity with Nelson Mandela. We were in the same section of just 30 of us prisoners in single cells for the 12 years that I was there. We worked together in the quarry, and therefore we forged a friendship in prison, and a friendship that has endured throughout his life. It was built on respect, it was built on confidence, built on sharing a vision, and therefore it was a great lesson for me. Profound in both the values that he instilled, the examples that he gave to me of what it means to be a servant of the people, but above all, it taught me what to be as a human being in your interaction with other human beings. So it's been a profound experience for me. It is not just Mandela, it is also people like Walter Sisulu, but Mandela is the best known, and he taught me many lessons. He rapped me over the knuckles many times, and so there are times when I hate him. I don't like to forgive him for the rapping of the knuckles, but it's been my great privilege in life.
On the subject of leadership, can you trace briefly his journey from an ordinary citizen to a great, beloved Nelson Mandela?
I think the first element of that journey is to realize that throughout the 27 years that he spent in prison, serving a life sentence plus a sentence of 5 years. We used to tease him in prison. How is he going to serve that sentence? Should he start with life first and then do the 5 years? Or should he start with the 5 years and then do the life? But in those 27 years, even though we still petitioned and demanded our release, starting with a petition that we all signed in 1968, he never asked for his own release. And when it came to the push in the 1989 period, he worked hard to ensure that his colleagues were released first. So that's one part of that journey that he made. The second part that stands out is that the first time he was brought to trial and sentenced to 5 years, that was in 1962, and I was already in the country in the underground having undergone training. He entered that courtroom without any lawyers. He refused lawyers and legal representation. He walked in wearing an African garb, and he made a speech saying that I'm a black man in a white man's court. I'm a black man in a white man's court. And he said, being tried under laws made by the white people. That speech was focusing on the illegitimacy of the system under which we were living. It was not about himself. The second part of that journey was when he was brought from prison and charged in the Rivonia trial for leading Umkhonto we Sizwe. Many decisions had been taken while he had already been in prison. But he determined and said to his fellow colleagues, I'm going to be the one, because I was the first commander-in-chief, I'm going to stand up in court and take responsibility for what we did. And some of them said, but you were not involved in what you did while you were in prison. He said, no, I take responsibility for that. That speech has gone down in history throughout the world because he talked about being prepared to die for his beliefs. We've discussed that with him many times, asking why did you take that stand? He said to us, it was important that as a leader, we shouldn't plead for clemency and mercy. It was important that even if we were to be sentenced to death, we should leave the proper message to those generations that would follow us. But it is a speech also in which he cast a vision, and he spoke about that he was opposed to white domination and to black domination. And therefore, in that journey, he had come to embrace everybody, irrespective of color, irrespective of gender, irrespective of religion, to be citizens worthy of being treated with equality and respect. I think it was that are the three landmarks that I would say in his journey, because they illustrate the qualities that developed in him and send a message to all of us what it really means if you are a servant of the people.
It then begs the question, Mr. Maharaj, what would you say, where did this confidence come from? Being young, thinking broadly, talk to me about his confidence.
His confidence came perhaps like Gandhiji, the development of supreme confidence that the vision you have for society is correct. It's not just seeing what's wrong and being angry at what's wrong. It's having a perspective that from every angle, doesn't matter whether you are religious or not religious, whatever your color, whatever your religion, but you know that everybody around you will realize that you have a vision that embraces all of them and therefore is just in the deepest sense of the word. It is that confidence, it is that gives you the confidence to go into prison and say, I'm ready for that. I can take it. And yes, it will be painful. I can be separated from my family. But you will also notice that in the preface, in the foreword that he wrote to my biography, he refers to things that we talked about. He talked about how when we entered the struggle, we were in a certain sense, and he uses the word, he says we were selfish. He said we didn't think of the consequences for our loved ones, our partners, our children, our parents. He says we acted on what we believed. And he says in that sense we were selfish. And therefore, it again brings out this nature of the vision you have, and how even when you have made mistakes of being selfish, you look for opportunities to undo those mistakes on the basis of empathizing with every living person. And we are learning now that we have to be also in empathy because we are part of nature and not above nature. And I think that when you look at Gandhiji's life and how his philosophy and outlook and activism evolved, he was imbued with this vision that gave him that confidence.
And can you pinpoint that moment in time when you recognized and you were inspired by his vision and the action that followed?
There are so many. There are so many. First of all, the direct one in prison. In the early years of 1965, the National Commissioner of Prisons, holding the rank of a general, we were in the quadrangle that you see where we were breaking stones, seated about 1.5 meters apart from each other, not allowed to talk to each other, breaking stones with a 4-pound hammer. And the Commissioner of Prisons, the general, came down that ramp. And Mandela, as soon as he saw him, walked up to raise questions about our treatment. And when General Stade began to talk with him, Mandela insisted on calling Walter Sisulu to join him. And we could hear the conversation because General Steyn, a very slight built, very modest, well-dressed, didn't wear a uniform, wore a black suit, a hat. General Steyn turned around and said to Mandela when he was complaining about the treatment and conditions, said, Mandela, you better remember you are in prison, you are not in a hotel. And stop complaining because the laws of prison do not allow you to complain about treatment of others. You can only speak for yourself. And I, listening to that, said to myself, Madiba is in trouble now. How is he going to deal with that? And without raising his voice, in the same tone, he turned to the general and he said, General, We are at war today. And you are the general on one side of the war, and I'm on the other side. We don't know who's going to win in this war. In no war can you be sure who will win. But one thing we know, that at the end of the war, even if one side has won, there will be a moment where the two generals will have to meet, even if it is to accept the surrender of the other. How that moment takes place will be determined by how we treat each other today. And believe you me, because he didn't raise his voice, because he spoke courteously, respectfully, but put the issue on the table, never again did General Steyn come and speak rudely to him or to us in that section. And that was for me a profound message. It showed me when I was saying, I was a young man, I was 29 years old. I would have wanted to punch that general in the nose and go back and get lashes. Or I would have been wanted to abuse him and swear him in F's and B's. But no, he showed me, hold your cause, but speak to the other side in a language that the other side will understand. Don't lecture to them about your vision and the differences we have. Focus on the issue of today, but keep the perspective of tomorrow in mind. So you asked me how. I said there are so many moments, but I've taken time to tease out one moment. Because even when we are at war on a just cause, we need to set the example that we stand for a greater humanity than the oppressor and the exploiter.
Yeah. The profoundness that you speak about so candidly, Mr. Maharaj, the world has seen that over the years, over the decades, and you obviously was in a privileged position to experience that firsthand. Mm-hmm. But I'd like to know some of the standout memories from a personal perspective that you enjoyed with the great Madiba.
Enjoyed or suffered? Because
well, whichever way you look at it.
Immediately what comes to mind is one of the things that I suffered from him. As I said, I was a young man, hot-headed when I went to prison, believing that we just had to go to war, kill the other side, and all things will be solved. And I was getting in trouble with prison with the authorities when we went to work at the lime quarry. Of course, the authorities were the warders in charge were rude. One of them had a swastika tattooed on his hand. And I would get into trouble, and in the trouble, I would end up by saying things that I would get charged for being abusive and rude to the warders. And Mandela one day called me at work and he said, look, Mac, you're doing the right thing. You're taking up the issues. But you're forgetting that we are in prison and you're taking it up in the wrong way. You get angry. The issue you have taken up is correct. The warder provokes you, says rude things to you. You begin to respond with rude words, and they charge you for your rudeness. That's not the way. He says, that way we will end up dying in prison. Our job is to live through this prison and continue the war. So I say to him, what do you expect me to do? So he says, look, I know you seems to me you lose your temper. So when this happens next, please count to 10, pick your words. You are skilled enough to pick your words in such a way that they will sting that warder, but he cannot charge you for being abusive and rude. I followed that. I never got charged successfully in prison again, but I have a problem. Nowadays, and he told me, by the way, I said, but it must have an impact. He said, no. Pick your words, speak with emphasis, even if it's necessary, pretend you are angry, but control what you are saying. Now, I've learned to control what I say. I've learned to pretend when I'm angry. And the problem that has arisen that he's left me with is sometimes I don't know when I'm angry, when I'm pretending, and when I'm really angry. So, yes, there are moments like that. There are moments of his immense empathy. There was a time when, before 94, I was called on a Sunday morning at 5 o'clock. Usual for him. Mac, where are you? I'm in town. How far from me? Oh, about 10 minutes. Come over now. And I had promised Zarina that I would look after the kids that morning and she must take it easy. And the kids were already in the yard playing. So I went to them, I said, kids, let's go. Oh, no, Dad, what is this? I said, no, let's go. In Madiba's yard, there is a place where you all can play. So I took them along, showed them from the backyard where's the kitchen, where they could make themselves at home. The meeting had already started, and the room where the meeting was taking place led out into the corridor with frosted windows, sandblasted windows. So you could see silhouettes. Walk into the room, the meeting has started. Madiba is seated in such a way that he can see the entrance, the door. The meeting continues, and at some stage, Madiba sees the silhouette of two little kids going past into the corridor. And he walks out of the meeting without saying anything. He says, carry on discussing, comrades. Goes out. I realized, well, I was a very heavy smoker. My time to go out and have a smoke. So I go out and I get to the veranda. Madiba's back is towards me. My two kids are facing him. And he's leaning over because he's tall. My kids are 9 and 11 or 8 and 10. And he's trying to find out who they are. So he says to them, who brought you here? My daughter, who's the younger one, is the forward one. I learned then that women are the forward ones. She turns around and she says to him, our father. So he said, he's trying to find out who they are. So he says, what's your name? She says, I'm Joey. My brother is Mills. Still doesn't help him. He says, where do you live? She says, Johannesburg, South Africa. By this time, I'm nearing it, and I couldn't help it. So I burst out, and I say to my daughter, Joey, why don't you tell Tata, which is the respectful word for grandfather, why don't you tell Tata what he wants to know? She says, Dad, because I know what he wants to know, but he's not asking me the right question. From that time, whenever we met in the light-hearted moment, he says, where's that young lady who doesn't want to answer my questions? So he was capable of relating to people never in an officious way. Even in the most official moments, you felt empathy from him. You felt that he saw you as a human being, and it did not matter if you were a 5-year-old or a 70-year-old. All of you deserved equal respect. So those are sort of incidents that come.
Such a marvelous tale of empathy that we can all learn from. But I'd like to know, how can we as a nation learn from the strengths of his character? In a nutshell, what would you put it down to in terms of
I
his
think
character?
there is an outlook that citizens of India, because of their experience of having been led by a person like Gandhiji, an outlook that everybody in Africa, because of our cultural norms and our concept of Ubuntu, and an outlook that intersects with all the basic premise of religions. It is the idea that you only become a human and you only become an expression of your humanity in the way in which you interact with others. That is the core issue. And that is what leads to the idea that being on this earth, whatever your perspective, if you want to be remembered, do it but through making a difference to the lives of others. We expect you to do things for yourself and your own family. That's normal. But when you do it to make a difference to the lives of others, that is when you become truly human. So that's what I believe emerges as a lesson from Mandela, but it is shared as a lesson that comes out throughout the world in each of our people's experiences. And it is what makes it possible for us to stand together to be able to share a vision.
Absolutely amazing. Mr. Maharaj, in a book, if you can just see the bit of the cover, which was released today on this Madiba Day, which I had the privilege of editing and compiling. By the way, the book is freely available. Sewlal Hatton, the Chief Executive Officer of the Nelson Mandela Foundation, writes in a very vivid way about Mandela making mistakes along the way. And he makes specific reference to the time when he was on the campaign trail for the 1994 historic elections in our country. And he talks about Madiba asking for, or requesting, should I say, that the voting age be reduced to 14. No sooner had he made those comments, the criticism came back fast and furious. And Madiba realized it was a mistake on his part, and he took full responsibility. Can you talk about Madiba, that incident, and some of the other incidents whereby Madiba stood up and said, I made a mistake, let's move on. I'm sorry, let's move on.
Sewlal is right to refer to the incident, but I was around. I was a member of the National Executive at that time. I was involved in the debates, and I was involved in following it up outside. It's a most interesting event. We were heading, our negotiations were about to produce the basis on which we could move to elections in 1994. And Madiba in the African National Congress leadership raised the question of the voting age. And he proposed that we should be 14-year-olds. And we said to him, what are you talking? You can't be serious. He had come prepared. He had done research. He had done research around the world. And he came up and he said, in this country, there are 18-year-olds who got votes. This country, there are 16-year-olds. This country, there's 14-year-olds. And he said, here in South Africa, it has been our children who have had to stand up to the apartheid security forces, coming with their tanks, coming with their guns and shooting, and it is our children who have been part of the fight back with sticks and stones. And we've called them the young lions of the struggle. How can we deny them the vote? And we argued with him. You know, he was so stubborn. He fought back in the debates. But we held our ground. He lost the debate. Now, the interesting thing is, he lost the debate, he obeyed our decision. But years later, when we were in retirement, we were having a chat, him and I, just joking, gossiping, reminiscing. And I said to him, Madiba, Jesus, you are so stubborn. And I referred to this incident. And I said to him, but at least you listen to us. So he says, no. You don't realize it's not you people, your arguments that persuaded me. What persuaded me was the next day I saw a cartoon in the newspapers. It was a cartoon of me as a baby in a child's pram, feeding off a bottle and asking for votes for 14-year-olds. He says, when I saw the cartoonist making fun of me, I decided, yes, I'm wrong. I stopped being a clown. Let me back down. So you see, the incident for me is most amusing. It brings out the discipline that he had. It brings out his willingness to argue. But it also brings out the lightheadedness. We had persuaded him, he had obeyed our... But he, when talking to me in a lighthearted way, he wouldn't concede. He said, no, it was the cartoonist. But there was a profound lesson there too. Because cartoonists have a sensitivity of the index of our society. And you have to listen to that too. And when he was justifying it that way, I find it so amusing but so telling.
What are some of the other lighter moments you enjoyed with Madiba?
You know, he could be so stubborn. When we were writing his autobiography secretly, he would write every night 10 to 15 pages with no reference of what he had written the night before. Smuggle it next morning. We would transcribe it, and it had to be circulated to Walter Sisulu, Kathrada, myself, to comment. But in the meantime, every day he and I pretended we were ill and we did not go to work at the Lai Quarry. So we stayed behind. And so we would go into the quadrangle and sit there and discuss what he's written and what he's going to write. But there was one rock that I would sit on, and there was a concrete block that he would upend so that it's taller than the rock. And he's taller than me, bigger than me, and he would sit on a rock so that I would have to look up to him. So one day I said, no, this discussion is going the wrong way. So before he could get to the yard, I went into the quadrangle, I took the concrete block and I sat on that. And he came along and he said to me, and he called Afrikaans word, a nickname for nephew, he used to call me Neef. So he comes and towers over me and he says, Neef, that's my seat. So I said to him, no, Madiba, no. This is not on. You talk to me from a higher position and you talk with that authority and I have to look up to you as if to say I have to be your follower. No, today I'm sitting here. Do you know, for that week, we held no discussion because he only wanted to take that seat. And I ended up by saying, okay, go to hell, take that seat. So we were in a serious enterprise. We had wonderful moments. I used to be a problem in prison. And the organization would try to discipline me. We were illegal. We were not allowed to exist in an organization. We had clandestine cells. And Madiba ended up by looking around to the colleagues and saying to Comrade Kathrada, Kathy, go and speak to this boy. Get him to be disciplined. Kathrada came to me and we argued and he failed. Madiba then went to Walter Sisulu and said, Komela, go and speak to this boy. Walter came to me and we discussed and I explained the issues. He went back and he said, no man, that boy he's got reasons for his actions. Madiba turned around and said, you chaps are a waste of time. I'll tackle him. So he came next day to me at the quarry. And he said to me, Mac, are you a member of the organization? I said, yes. He says, do you obey the decisions taken by the organization? I said, of course. He says, before we take the decision, are you free to express your views? I said, of course. So he says, but once the decision is taken, even if it is against your views, do you obey it? I said, of course. He says, thank you very much. And he walked away to go to work. And I said, wait a minute, old man, come here. What are you talking about? He said, no. You've said it from your own mouth. Please obey the decisions of the organization. I said, no, but wait, let's discuss the issues. He went back to Walter and he's laughing and he says, you see, you chaps try to debate with that boy. No, just tell him what are the rules and he will obey the rules. He did that to me throughout his life. He had a great sense of fun. He loved to tease us. And he allowed us to tease him because in prison, we were in this corridor locked up with two cells on each side. On a weekend, we would be locked up throughout Saturday and Sunday, only allowed out for 1 hour to walk in what they call single file as our exercise. But there began to arrive priests on a Sunday morning. And the first priest who arrived had to preach in the corridor without us seeing him. We demanded in the end to be opened. So we were allowed in the corridor. And I remember the first priest who arrived when we were allowed open was a Catholic priest. And he announced all those who are Catholics. And amongst us was another mischievous comrade, Bidinaya, who is deceased now and he was serving 20 years. When he asked all those who are Catholics, Bidinaya shouted, Mandela. So Mandela had to go to the Catholic service. A few weeks later arrived a priest from another denomination, the Methodist. All those who are Methodist, Billy shouted, Mandela. So Mandela had to go to the Methodist church. So we began to do that to every denomination, and he had to go. So at the quarry, Madiba says to us, man, chaps, what are you doing to me? You're making me go to every religious service. Billy Naya says to him, Madiba, you brought us to prison. Now you go and pray for us in every denomination. And Madiba had to go to every service. But he did that because of his respect for religion. But he did that also as a light-hearted thing with us, to know that we were joking, we were teasing him, we were making him pay the price for being a leader.
Mr. Maharaj, earlier on in our conversation, you spoke about Madiba rapping you over the knuckles. And can you briefly tell us about his toughness? Was he generally a difficult person to work with?
No, not difficult to work with, but hard as nails when it was necessary. He gave you all. What was disarming is that he showed you respect. I have recounted that we would see in the quarry, if he and Walter Sisulu were standing at one place pretending to work and engage in a discussion, we could not hear the discussion, or if we could hear little bits of it, the moment I saw him raise his finger like this to Walter Sisulu, and Walter's name was Walter Maxulate Sisulu, clan name Kamela, or there's another clan name, I'll try and remember. But if we heard Madiba change from using the name Kamela to say, now look, Walter, in very gentle voice, we knew that there was a serious argument taking place. Right? So you say, what kind of person was he? When the moment demanded action, he was uncompromising. Stubborn, as I gave you the example of the 14-year-old. There were many discussions when we got into negotiations and the crisis blew up and violence erupted in the country, and we found evidence that the regime was behind it, the apartheid regime. We walked out of the talks. So the debate took place in the leadership now. What happens next? And many of the comrades who had demanded that we walk out now were saying, we better get back to the talks. And Mandela says, no. We left the talks on a principled issue. So we say to him, but wait a minute, if the regime doesn't back down, what do you propose? He says, well, we go back to the armed struggle. We said, wait a minute. He says, no, we go back to the armed struggle. And now we had to have a different debate. We had to forget what the regime has done, now to persuade this old man to say, no, we've got to get back to talks. And the debates had to be serious. I remember a time he was out of the country and I'm the joint secretary, and the process had developed to a point where I saw that former President de Klerk of the apartheid system had taken up a stance that was sort of putting us in a bit of a difficult space. And so I went to the executive and I proposed a maneuver and a standpoint. And we agreed. We took it up publicly. Madiba returned from abroad. He called me. He says, I believe you are responsible for persuading the comrades to change our position. So I explained to him why we did it. He said, no. I'm calling a meeting again. I want that matter rediscussed because you were departing from an established decision of the organization. And I want that departure to be properly discussed. And he reopened the discussion. And we had to again debate it and convince him why we had taken the decision. And when I went back to him and said, Madiba, what's wrong with you? He says, Mac, we have an obligation to the public. We have shifted our position. It is necessary that we should be able to explain it to the public so that they understand why we have shifted it. So I said to him, no, we can't explain why. Because if we explain why, we are letting de Klerk and the apartheid system know why we are doing it. He says, okay, but still we have to explain why we have changed. So tough, but easy to work with. Yes, painful at times, because, Mr. Sewlal, adhering to the discipline that's required in the freedom struggle is not an easy thing. Mandela himself was a member of the ANC executive in the early 50s when we had committed ourselves to non-violent forms of struggle. And at a public meeting in Sophia Town, he said, maybe the time is come to change our tactics and go for arms. The national executive called him and said, you have spoken out of turn, and they censored him. He took it in the chin. He stopped calling for that. 1960 comes. We stage a 3-day strike, it's crushed. He goes gives an interview that was broadcast on the BBC saying it's time to close the chapter, meaning it's time to turn to violence. The national executive calls him, reprimands him, says you've done wrong, censors him. He accepts the censorship. And he adjusts his conduct and says, sorry, I was wrong, I spoke out of turn. We say to him, you can speak inside the body, but you can't start off by speaking in public and misleading the people. And he says, I was wrong. Now, how many of us do that, even in the world that we are today building?
And finally, Mr. Maharaj, what's your message on this special day, being Madiba Day?
I've said that knowing him has been a privilege, and even though he's long gone, I often reflect and try to understand what is the message of his life. I have reached a point where I do not want to take particular viewpoints as distilling from his life. I realized that when he retired as president, he was asked what was his greatest regret. And he said at that time, that without blinking, he said, my regret was that I did not act decisively when HIV/AIDS hit our country. So he was searching for the issues that unite our people and stand to defend them and progress their lives. And he began to cling to HIV/AIDS as a worldwide campaign because he saw what we are seeing today in the pandemic. That is a worldwide phenomenon, and we have all you cannot insulate one country and think that you have solved the problem. So he made that part of his campaign worldwide, and he called it the 466/64 campaign, which was his prison number. But then he changed. And what I see is that he was searching in his retirement, what is the issue that can unite our people across classes, across religion, so that we work together despite our other differences. And he was searching for an issue that links worldwide. And we can see it today in the pandemic. We can see the necessity to work together in the face of the fourth industrial revolution. We can see it in the digital revolution, which carries huge issues for us to communicate with each other, but also carries the dangers of fake news, which exploit base human emotions. It goes with the necessity for us to fight climate change together. It goes with the pluses and the minuses of globalization, but that we cannot fight it on our own. So he was always searching for an issue that would bring us together. And today the pandemic has unearthed things to show us that it is impossible for humanity to progress unless we find these common platforms of action. He, along that path, saw the necessity for eradication of poverty to be the issue that should unite us. And he said, there is no greater indignity to a human being than to subject them to poverty. So whatever the issue, the lesson for me and the message from Mandela is can we interact with each other searching for the issue that will unite the people of our country, that will unite us with the rest of the world, so that we can take up a particular challenge and really change the condition of the human being and of society. That's the message. I'm not saying what is the issue. I'm saying, can that become the way in which we conduct ourselves? Search for the issues that will unite us, that will benefit not just yourself, not just your country, but will benefit all humanity.
Mr. Maharaj, my sincere thanks for your openness, your frankness, and I must just say you really had an enviable relationship with Madiba, and I can hear the wisdom that has come out over those years in prison and beyond the prison walls. I must say I thoroughly enjoyed our conversation, and I truly will remember this Madiba Day with profound pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Much appreciated.
Indeed. Thank you so much, Mr. Maharaj and Advocate Robin Sewlal. Thank you so much, Mr. Maharaj, for taking us into that rich crevices of history. Indeed, so profound and so interesting. With that, we've come to the conclusion of Mandela Day celebrations, and I'd like to invite Mr. Sipibe Mchunu from the Swami Vivekananda Cultural Center at the Consulate General of India in Devon to render this evening's a vote of thanks.
Namaskar. Greetings to all of you. On behalf of Swami Vivekananda Cultural Center at the Consulate General of India in Devon, I am honored today to deliver a vote of thanks on today's program, Celebrations of Birth Anniversary of Nelson Mandela. Allow me to thank our online guest, Mr. Seshadranand Ragunanan Maharaj, and also Advocate Robin Sewlal. The discussions or the interactions that you had this evening, it was very informative and very touching also, and it also gave us more clarity on the life and times of Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela. So to Maharaj ji and Robin Sewlal ji, thank you. Thank you very much for these touching interactions that you gave us this evening. Indeed, it's all our duty to discuss all the issues that are dividing us. As Maharaj ji said, we need to have a common ground where all of us, we will discuss those issues so that we'll work together as human beings. So once again, thank you very much for the interaction. To Dr. Chaitanya Prakash Yogi, Director of Swami Vivekananda Cultural Center at the Consulate General of India in Devon, Srishti Harinarayan, Sri Piyush Khandelwal, thank you very much for taking part on today's program. To all our online participants, on behalf of Swami Vivekananda Cultural Center in Devon, we like to say thank you very much for taking part on today's program. You are kindly advised to visit our Facebook page, ICCR Devon, for all cultural activities organized by Swami Vivekananda Cultural Center in Devon. Once again, to all our online guests, Dhanyavad, and to all of you, have a wonderful evening. Namaskar.